Wind moves through empty door frames and makes a sound like someone breathing through their teeth. A weathered sign stands alone in the high desert, Bodie State Historic Park. It is late afternoon. The sun sits low and heavy, turning the air the color of old brass. Long shadows stretch across Main Street, and the buildings look less like buildings and more like props left behind after the actors went home. A storefront window reflects nothing but sky. A half-open door taps lightly in the wind as if it is trying to remember how to close. This place used to be loud. Not the loud of music and celebration, but the loud of survival. Boots on boards, bargains shouted, piano notes fighting with gunshots. A town that ran on ore, whiskey, and winter. Now it is only the wind. Bodie is famous because it died in a very specific way. Not demolished, not rebuilt, not smoothed into something polite. It bled out and stayed where it fell. Preserved, not as a museum of neat stories, but as a scene left untouched. So tonight, we're walking into it slowly. Was Bodie truly cursed? Guarded by some invisible punishment for anyone who steals its bones? Or was it simply a town built on greed, cold, and bad math that eventually ran out? Let's begin. Chapter 1. Boomtown Born in Snow. Before Bodie was a ghost town, it was a rumor. The kind of rumor that travels faster than people. A whisper that moves across mountains and campsites, carried by men who have nothing but time and hunger. They say there's color in the hills, not enough to prove anything yet, but enough to make a man stare at the ground like it owes him a secret. In the summer of 1859, a prospector named Waterman S. Bodie found gold in these hills, high above Mono Lake. Not a fortune, not yet, but a sign, a spark. And then winter arrived, like a verdict. This is not the gentle winter people imagine when they picture the West. This is high elevation, thin air, and storms that do not care if you are brave. Snow that erases roads, wind that steals heat from bone. Bodie did what a practical man would do. He went to get supplies. And on the way back, he froze to death. That detail matters because it sets the tone for everything that follows. Bodie's origin story is not a victory, it's a warning. The town's very name is tied to a man who found hope and then lost his body to the cold. Even the spelling of Bodie carries a strange little twist. The name shifted over time, like people were sanding down rough edges, trying to make the word look better on a sign. The town's identity was being edited before it had even become real. But once gold is confirmed, the editing stops. Because gold is not patient. Gold doesn't care about poetry. Gold turns men into motion. At first, it was small, a few miners, a camp, rough shelters that existed to hold heat at night and keep tools from disappearing. Then a mill, then more men, then more claims, and then the moment that changed everything, a richer strike in the mid-1870s. That's when Bodie stops being a camp and becomes a town. Not a polite town, not a planned town. A town that grows the way a fire grows, fast, hungry, loud. By the time the main boom hits, Bodie is no longer a rumor. It is a destination, a place people speak about with a mixture of hunger and fear. And that combination is always dangerous, because when a town is built by people who are running towards something, it fills with another kind of person too, the ones running away. Chapter 2. Rise of the Bad Men of Bodie. Picture the first time Bodie truly looks like a city. It's not the buildings that give it away, it's the movement. A mile of street packed tight with wagons and men, ore sacks, lumber, food crates, kegs rolled into doorways, horses sweating in the cold, smoke climbing from stovepipes into an already gray sky. This is a town built at altitude, which means every breath costs a little more than it should. Winters are long, nights bite hard. Wood is life. And still they come. The population swells so quickly that Bodie feels less like a settlement and more like a mouth that can't stop eating. People arrive faster than homes can be built. Businesses appear overnight. A street that was dust becomes a spine. And then comes the number that always grabs people by the collar: saloons. Bodie becomes famous for them, not because it had alcohol, every mining town did, but because the ratio starts to feel like parody, the kind of detail that makes the town sound like a cautionary tale told by a disappointed parent. Along that mile of Main Street, there are saloons stacked close together, doors swinging, windows glowing, music bleeding into the wind. On some nights, you could walk from one end to the other and never lose the smell of whiskey. But Bodie wasn't just drinking, it was coping. This town is full of men who sleep in cold rooms and wake up to dangerous work. Full of men who have been told that the next shovel of dirt could change their life, and then it doesn't. Full of men who are one bad week away from losing everything. In places like this, the saloon is not just entertainment, it's therapy. It's the only warm room. It's the place where you can pretend your luck isn't running out. And when enough desperate men gather in warm rooms with cheap whiskey and expensive ego, something else arrives: violence. Not constant violence, not chaos every minute, but a constant risk of violence, the kind of tension you can feel before anything even happens, like the town is always holding its breath. Newspapers pick up on it, stories spread. Bodie gains a reputation. It becomes a name you say with a half smile and a warning: the bad men of Bodie. And here's the important part. Reputations like that attract the exact type of person who wants to live inside a reputation. Outlaws, drifters, men who like the idea of being feared. So the town gets sharper, and the line between honest work and theft gets thinner. Because when gold is in the ground, you don't just dig for it, you fight for it. Gold fever and bloodshed. Gold changes the way people speak. A man with no money talks about tomorrow. A man who thinks he's about to strike it rich talks like tomorrow already belongs to him. In Bodie, you can hear that shift in the way the town moves. Everything becomes urgent. Claims are staked, disputed, restaked. Partnerships form and break apart. Someone swears the ore is richer over the next ridge. Someone else swears the whole thing is a lie meant to lure fools into spending their last dollars in town. And underneath the arguments is the reality no one wants to say out loud. Most people don't get rich. A few do, enough to keep the dream alive. But the town is filled with men working themselves into the ground for wages, not fortunes. Hard labor, long shifts, dangerous equipment, cold that never fully leaves your hands. This is the part of the gold rush story that gets softened in movies. Real mining is not romantic. It's loud machinery and aching backs. It's rock dust in your lungs. It's the constant knowledge that the mountain could kill you without meaning to. Bodie's mines grow more industrial as the boom deepens. This isn't just panning in a creek anymore. This is stamp mills, hoists, shafts, and timetables. You don't look for gold so much as you feed ore into a system and hope the numbers come out in your favor. And those numbers matter because Bodie is expensive. Everything has to be brought in: food, lumber, coal, tools, machinery parts, clothing, medicine, even the paper for newspapers and the ink for signs. A town this high and this remote bleeds money. So people squeeze each other. Prices go up, wages don't always match. Gambling fills the gap between hope and reality. Prostitution becomes part of the economy like it does in every place where men are lonely and far from home. And then the predictable problems. Stagecoach routes mean cash is moving: payroll money, gold shipments, bank transfers. So bandits show up, claim jumpers show up, men who don't want to spend years digging show up. And when that happens, Bodie develops another industry: protection. Men paid to keep order, men paid to enforce law, men paid to scare other men into behaving. But the West has always had this strange weakness. The people hired to stop violence often know how to create it better than anyone else. So Bodie becomes a place where the line between lawman and outlaw can blur, depending on who is watching and who is paying. And the town keeps going anyway. That's the wild part. Even with fear in the air, families arrive, children, schools, churches. Because the boom is so big that people convince themselves this isn't just a mining camp anymore. This is a future. And once families arrive, the stakes get higher. A bar fight is no longer just a bar fight. It's a threat to the fragile idea that this place is livable. So Bodie tries to become two things at once: a city and a frontier. That tension never ends well. Chapter 4: City of 2,000 Buildings. When people picture a ghost town, they picture emptiness. But ghost towns were not built empty, they were built crowded. At its peak, Bodie is not a little cluster of shacks. It is a full ecosystem of need. Banks, hotels, stores, restaurants, barbershops, blacksmiths, boarding houses, warehouses, a jail, cemeteries, newspapers, fire companies. And yes, the town grows into the thousands of structures. This is where Bodie stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like a machine. Because a gold town doesn't just mine gold, it mines people. It requires constant labor, not only underground but above it. Think about the invisible work. The man who hauls wood all day so someone else can stay warm at night. The woman who washes clothes until her hands crack because miners pay for clean shirts like they pay for whiskey. The cook feeding dozens of boarders 3 times a day in a place where fresh food is never guaranteed. The shopkeeper who sells candles, picks, nails, and boots at prices that make him rich but also make him hated. Bodie's gold is a product of all of them, not just the miners. And then there is the industrial heart, the mills. Mills pound ore into dust over and over, day after day, like a mechanical heartbeat. The sound carries. If you lived in Bodie during its busiest years, you didn't live with silence, you lived with pounding. Now add the weather. Bodie's winters are brutal. Snow piles up, roads turn to ice, supplies get delayed, people get sick, accidents happen. And so the town builds for survival. Firewood is stacked everywhere, windows are small, walls are thin but urgent. And still, fire is always waiting. Because most buildings are wood, most heat comes from stoves, most light comes from flame. A town like this doesn't ask if it will burn, it asks when. And Bodie tries to prepare: volunteer fire companies, fire bells, water storage, men who run toward smoke. But there's an ugly truth in old mining towns. When you pack buildings close together, when you fill them with wood and flame, and when you add wind, fire doesn't spread, fire moves, like a living thing. So Bodie's boom years carry a shadow. This whole city is a temporary miracle balanced on a few conditions. The ore must stay rich, the money must stay flowing, the winter must not kill too many, the fire must not come at the wrong time. And the moment any of those conditions fail, the town's future collapses fast. Because Bodie is not a normal city. It doesn't have slow decline built into it. It has a switch. And when the switch flips, the town dies in a way that feels sudden, even if the warning signs were always there. Before we get to the fall, we need to do the numbers. Because Bodie's scale is part of what makes it haunting. This wasn't a little place. This was a world. Chapter 4.5, the numbers section, how big Bodie really was. At the height of the boom, Bodie's population is often estimated in the high thousands, with some accounts putting it near 10,000. Main Street stretches for over a mile, packed with businesses and traffic. The town becomes known for a staggering number of saloons, with sources commonly repeating the figure of 65. And at its fullest build-out, Bodie had roughly 2,000 structures before fire and time reduced it to a fraction. Bodie's mines also produced staggering value, but the exact number depends on what you count and how you translate it into modern money. Some estimates focus on a district total around the mid-30 millions in historical reporting, while other summaries, including federal historic documentation, cite a higher estimated total output for the key boom-to-closure period. In other words, the gold was real, but even more real was the cost. Because to pull wealth out of this mountain, Bodie had to become a city, and cities are expensive. So when the gold begins to thin out, the town doesn't simply get quieter, it begins to hollow out. And hollow things burn easily. Chapter 5. When the Fire Bell Tolled. Bodie's first great fire comes like a reminder. It doesn't arrive politely. It doesn't burn one building and stop. It takes advantage of everything Bodie is made of: wood, wind, and closeness. Flames climb through walls the way gossip climbs through a small town. A window shatters and suddenly a whole room is oxygen. A roof catches and suddenly embers are flying like insects. People form bucket lines. Men run with axes. Someone tries to save a ledger. Someone tries to save a piano. Someone tries to save a child. And above it all is the same sound you hear in every historic fire story: the bell. That frantic, repetitive warning that says, "This is bigger than us." Fires do something strange to boomtowns. They don't just destroy buildings, they destroy confidence. Because once you've watched your street turn into smoke, you understand how thin the whole thing is. And Bodie, for a while, survives anyway. That's important. Bodie is not a one-night tragedy. It's not a single disaster that wipes it off the map. The town gets hit, then keeps going, because there is still ore, still money, still the stubborn belief that the next year will be better. But the real killer isn't one fire. It's the second. In 1932, another major fire tears through Bodie and leaves the town permanently altered. After that, what remains is only a small fraction of what once stood, a reduced skeleton. And here's where Bodie becomes what we recognize today. Because after the second fire, the town doesn't fully rebuild. By then, the math has changed. The gold is not what it was. Mining is shifting, people are leaving, and investment in a remote, wind-whipped mountain town becomes harder to justify. So Bodie loses the thing that keeps towns alive after disaster: rebuilding. Instead, it starts to do something else. It starts to freeze, not in one dramatic moment, but gradually, like a body cooling after life leaves it. Rooms get closed, windows get boarded, stores stop restocking. A saloon that once smelled like smoke and sweat becomes a quiet box of dust. And dust is patient. Dust doesn't hurry. It settles on everything and makes every object look like it's been waiting for footsteps that never come. Chapter 6. Decline and Desertion, the Slow Unplugging. Towns like Bodie don't die the way people imagine. They don't wake up one morning and decide to become a ghost town. They lose one thing at a time. First, the easy optimism disappears, the kind you can hear in voices. Men stop saying, "when I hit it," and start saying, "if." Then businesses begin to thin. A store closes and someone says it's temporary. A hotel stops taking long-term boarders. A newspaper prints fewer pages. A family leaves for a better town and promises to write. Then the mines begin to falter in ways that are hard to explain to people who haven't lived through it. Ore is still there, but it costs more to reach. You have to go deeper. You have to pump more water. You have to repair more equipment. You have to pay men who know how to keep machines alive. And if gold prices don't rise fast enough, the town's central machine starts to run at a loss. That's the dirty truth behind so many frontier tragedies. The West was not only conquered by gunfights, it was conquered by accounting. And when the accounting turns against you, you can't shoot your way out. As Bodie declines, the town changes texture. The loud crowd thins, the street becomes wider. The wind becomes more noticeable. A boarded window stays boarded. A broken sign stays broken. A child's toy left in a yard stays there until it's bleached by sun and swallowed by snow. People still live here for a time. That matters too, because the ghost town version of Bodie tricks us into imagining everyone vanished at once. But real decline is awkward. A few families remain, a few stubborn men keep working, a few businesses keep operating, not thriving, just surviving. And then you reach the phase that feels the saddest. The town is still alive, but it's no longer a place anyone would choose. It's only a place people haven't escaped yet. That's when the buildings begin to feel like they're leaning inward, not from rot alone, but from loneliness. And it's in this phase that Bodie's myth begins to sharpen. Because when a town is fading, people start telling stories about it like it's already dead. They make it sound darker than it is, more cursed, more haunted, because the human mind hates slow endings. We'd rather believe in one dramatic explanation than accept the truth that most places don't fall. They drain. And when they drain far enough, someone eventually locks a door for the last time, and the town becomes what it always feared becoming, a place where the wind is the only voice left. Chapter 7. The Last to Leave. There is a specific moment when a town becomes a ghost, not when the mines slow down, not when a saloon closes, not even when Main Street looks empty. It becomes a ghost when the last regular life leaves it. And in Bodie, that happened in the shadow of a national decision. In 1942, the U.S. War Production Board suspended gold mining as non-essential during World War II. The mines shut down, and Bodie's remaining livelihood shut down with them. California State Parks puts it bluntly. Mining officially ceased in 1942, the final nail in the coffin. That doesn't mean the town vanished in one night, but it does mean the town lost its reason to stay alive. You can imagine the last years like a slow unplugging. A few families remain because leaving costs money, because pride is expensive, because sometimes the only thing a person has left is the place they already know. The wind is always present. The elevation is high enough that winter turns the town into a sealed room. California State Parks lists Bodie at about 8,375 feet, and in winter it can only be reached by skis, snowshoes, or snowmobiles. And that matters emotionally because it explains the silence. Bodie isn't just abandoned, it's isolated. When winter closes in, you don't simply visit Bodie, you commit to it. So imagine being one of the last residents, the last ones who still call it home. Your street is mostly empty, your neighbors are gone. A building that once held voices is now holding dust. The grocery options are thin, medical care is far away. The town that once had thousands of people is now only a handful holding on. And then, eventually, one family locks a door and walks away. Maybe they plan to come back for the furniture later. Maybe they tell themselves it's temporary. Maybe they simply can't bear to make it ceremonial. They leave objects where they are because objects are heavy and grief is heavier. This is where Bodie becomes different from a normal ruin. Most abandoned places get stripped, salvaged, burned, repurposed, turned into materials. Bodie didn't, at least not fully. Bodie kept its interior life. Even today, California State Parks describes Bodie's surviving interiors as still stocked with goods, left as they were when residents departed. That detail is everything, because it means Bodie isn't just architecture, it's evidence. And evidence attracts two kinds of people, those who want to understand the past and those who want to take a piece of it home. That's where the next part begins. Chapter 7.5, The People Bodie Forgot. Before we talk about looting and curses, there's a quieter truth that deserves space. When a ghost town becomes a story, it usually becomes a story about the loudest people, the gamblers, the gunmen, the saloons. But Bodie was also a place built on invisible labor. The National Park Service describes a Chinese community in Bodie, Chinatown, where many Chinese immigrants lived, often pushed out of mining work and into service work that kept the town functioning. They ran laundries, they supplied charcoal, they provided much of the wood used in town, they peddled vegetables shipped in by express. In other words, they helped Bodie survive its own harsh environment. And if you're building this channel long term, this is part of the compounding world effect, because the next time a viewer sees an empty street in Bodie, they don't only picture outlaws, they picture the people history usually edits out. That makes Bodie feel more real, and when something feels real, the viewer stays longer, because now the place isn't just eerie, it's human. Chapter 8. The Curse of Bodie. Here's the part most visitors hear first, not the mining history, not the fires, not the elevation or the wartime closure, the curse. The story goes like this. If you take anything from Bodie, a nail, a bottle, a rock, a piece of wood, you take it with you, and the town takes something back. Bad luck, accidents, illness, divorce, things unravel, and sooner or later, you feel the need to mail the object back, along with a letter that sounds like it was written at 3 in the morning with shaking hands. KQED reports that the curse letters arrive at Bodie State Historic Park about once a week, often anonymous, usually apologetic, sometimes with the stolen object rattling inside the envelope. That's not folklore in the abstract, that's mail. Real stamps, real envelopes, real guilt. And this is where Bodie becomes perfect for your 2-layer audience design. For the paranormal viewer, it's a clean hook. The town punishes thieves. And for the history viewer, it's a human story about guilt, preservation, and belief. Now the twist. KQED's reporting says the most curious thing about the curse is how it began, not with prospectors, but with the State Park Service itself. In other words, the curse may not be ancient at all. It may be policy, a story told to protect the place because Bodie kept getting picked apart. This is where you slow down and let the ambiguity do the work, because either way, the outcome is the same. People believe, and belief changes behavior. If you're the kind of person who doesn't believe in ghosts, you might still believe in consequences. You might still believe in guilt. You might still believe that stealing from a dead town is a strange thing to do, and strange things have a way of following you. And if you're the kind of person who loves ghost stories, Bodie becomes a town with teeth. Chapter 9. Desperate Measures. The curse that backfired. By the time Bodie became a protected historic site, it already had a problem. Tourists. Not the respectful kind, the souvenir kind. California State Parks is explicit about the rules now. Nothing may be collected or removed, including historic items, rocks, and plants. That strictness isn't accidental, it's reaction. Because once people realize Bodie still has objects in place, they start seeing the town like a free antique shop. A nail feels small, a bottle feels harmless, a spoon feels like nobody will miss it. But here's the quiet truth. Bodie is a story told through context. A single nail matters because it was in a specific board, in a specific building, in a specific town, at a specific moment in history. Remove it, and the object becomes junk. KQED describes how these returned items, even when mailed back, are now divorced from their original context, and that's part of the tragedy. So the park staff did what people often do when laws and signs don't work. They used fear. If the curse was encouraged or invented as a deterrent, it makes a cold kind of sense. A ranger can't stand next to every window. A fence can't stop a pocket. But a story can. And the curse story worked. Maybe too well, because now Bodie doesn't only deal with theft, it deals with returns, weekly letters, guilty packages, people begging for forgiveness, not from the law, from the town itself. And this is where Bodie becomes strangely modern, because the curse isn't just about ghosts, it's about the psychology of consequence. steals something, and you can't stop thinking about it. Every normal bad day becomes evidence. A flat tire becomes a sign. A sick child becomes a punishment. A breakup becomes a verdict. Eventually, the easiest way to make the anxiety stop is to mail the object back. The curse doesn't need to be supernatural to be effective. It only needs one thing: a human mind that hates unresolved guilt. Chapter 9.5, Scale Paragraph. How much of Bodie still stands? At its height, California State Parks describes Bodie as having around 2,000 structures and a population of roughly 8,000. Then the fires came, 1892 and 1932, and State Parks says those two fires reduced Bodie's remaining structures to less than 10% of what once stood. The National Park Service says more than 100 historic buildings remain and gives a figure of about 110 buildings still standing in and around the town today. So when you walk Bodie now, you're not seeing a few leftovers. You're seeing an entire town's last skin, a preserved fraction that still holds the shape of a life that used to fill it. Chapter 10, Return to Dust, Arrested Decay. Most places decay in one of two ways. They collapse naturally and vanish, or they get restored and become clean. Bodie chose a third option, arrested decay. California State Parks uses that exact phrase, and it explains why Bodie feels so different from other ghost towns. They don't rebuild Bodie into a theme park. They don't fix it into a fake version of itself. They stabilize it. They prop up what's falling, but they don't replace it with something new and shiny. So Bodie stays in that strange middle state, not alive, not gone, suspended. The National Park Service describes Bodie as being left as it was when residents abandoned it, a historic district in arrested decay, with interiors still stocked with goods and furniture. That means the town becomes a time capsule. A saloon piano sits in silence. A store shelf holds old cans. A room holds a chair, angled slightly away from a window, as if someone stood up and never sat down again. This is where your museum-like feeling kicks in. No visual shouting, no chaos, one emotion at a time. And the emotion here is simple. Time didn't just pass. Time settled, like dust settling on keys. And that's why Bodie doesn't feel like history. It feels like interruption, like life was paused mid-sentence, which brings us to the next layer, the one people argue about in the comments. If Bodie's just a preserved ruin, why do so many visitors swear it still sounds alive at night? Chapter 11, Echoes in the Saloon. If Bodie were only history, the story would end clean. A boomtown rises, a boomtown burns, a boomtown empties, the state preserves the shell. But Bodie does not feel clean. It feels occupied, not by people, by presence. That's the strange thing about places preserved in arrested decay. California State Parks uses the phrase openly, and the National Park Service does too. The buildings are left as they were when residents abandoned the town. So when you step into Bodie, you're not walking through a reconstructed version of the Old West. You're walking through an interruption. And interruptions do something to the mind, because your brain expects a story to finish. A chair should be moved, a bottle should be thrown away, a store shelf should be cleared, a door should be shut for the last time. In Bodie, the last time never feels final. That's why the saloons matter. Not because they were glamorous, not because they were romantic, because they were loud. In Bodie's peak years, the saloons weren't a side detail. They were the town's heartbeat. California State Parks even highlights the famous count, 65 saloons. So when visitors stand outside the wooden facades today and swear they hear piano notes, laughter, a distant argument, a hard crack that sounds like a gunshot, they are not only reacting to ghost stories, they're reacting to contrast. A place built for noise, forced into silence, and silence in a place that used to shout feels unnatural. Now, here's the careful line we walk. California State Parks calls Bodie a place of howling winds and even adds, almost playfully, an occasional ghost. That's not a scientific claim, it's a mood, a permission slip for your two-layer audience. If a viewer wants folklore, Bodie provides it. If a viewer wants history, Bodie provides the context that makes the folklore believable. Because even without the supernatural, Bodie has the ingredients that create haunting. Thin, high-altitude air, constant wind through broken seams, old wood that expands and contracts, empty interiors that hold and bend sound. A floorboard creaks and your mind supplies a reason. That's not stupidity, that's being human. And in Bodie, being human means hearing what might not be there because so much used to be there. Chapter 12. The Ghost with a Lantern. Every ghost town has one story that repeats more than the others. In Bodie, one of the most persistent is light. Not a full-bodied apparition, not chains, not screams. Just a lantern, a dim bobbing glow seen near the mill or out by the darker edges of town, usually at dusk, sometimes after sunset. It's the kind of detail that makes the story harder to dismiss because it's not dramatic, it's practical. A lantern means purpose. A lantern means someone is doing something, searching, patrolling, working late, and that fits Bodie's identity, a labor town, not a tourist town. But it also opens a second possibility. If you want the grounded layer, lantern stories are exactly what you'd expect in a preserved ruin with a long history of caretakers, rangers, and visitors. A car's headlight hits a window wrong and turns into a moving reflection. A flashlight passes behind warped glass and turns into a floating ember. A camera lens catches glare and makes it look like a slow drifting orb. Bodie is preserved, but it's not sealed. California State Parks makes it clear the town is actively managed, stabilized, and protected. So yes, sometimes a light is simply a person doing their job. But here's the part that keeps the loop open. Even if the light is explainable, the feeling isn't. Because in Bodie, the smallest human detail feels impossible. A single light inside a dead town triggers the oldest thought in the world. Someone's still here. Chapter 13. Myth versus reality. Let's talk about the myth that arguably built Bodie's modern fame, the curse. KQED reports that curse letters arrive at Bodie State Historic Park about once a week, often with an object enclosed and an apology written like a confession. That detail matters because it changes the curse from a story people tell to a behavior people repeat. And according to KQED, the curse story also had a second life. It wasn't just folklore that happened naturally. It may have been encouraged as a deterrent when looting was getting out of control. So what is it? A supernatural warning or a clever strategy that worked too well? Here's the most interesting answer. It might be both. Not because ghosts are proven, but because once enough people believe a thing, it becomes real in the only way that matters. It changes choices. A curse is a story designed to do one job, keep your hands in your pockets. And in Bodie, it worked. But the cost is strange because now the park doesn't just preserve buildings, it preserves guilt, an archive of letters that read like people are begging a town to forgive them. And this is where your channel's tone stays anti-hype. You don't need to scream, you just need to ask the quiet question. If a place can make thousands of visitors feel remorse, what is that exactly? Not a jump scare, something heavier. Chapter 14. A state of arrested decay. Most ruins disappear because nature is efficient. Wood rots, metal rusts, water finds cracks, wind does the rest. Bodie survived because the state intervened. California State Parks says Bodie was designated a state historic park in 1962 and is preserved in a state of arrested decay, with interiors left stocked as they were. The National Park Service describes the historic district the same way, left as it was when residents abandoned it. This is not restoration. This is restraint, and it's harder than it sounds. Because when you preserve a ruin, you're making an ongoing decision. We will not let it die, but we will not let it pretend to live. That's why Bodie feels like a freeze frame. It's the Old West held in place, not polished, not rewritten, not cleaned into fiction. And it also explains why Bodie's emotional pull is so strong for older audiences, because it's not a content experience, it's a memory experience. Even if you've never been here, your mind recognizes the language of abandonment: dishes left behind, curtains collapsed, shelves still holding goods, tools still on benches. Arrested decay makes Bodie feel honest, and honesty keeps people watching longer than excitement. Chapter 15. The Final Warning. There's a line that follows Bodie like a shadow. Goodbye, God, I'm going to Bodie. Depending on who tells it, the wording changes. Some versions even flip it into good by God, I'm going to Bodie. Bodie-focused writers and collectors openly note the uncertainty. And that uncertainty is perfect because it matches Bodie itself. Bodie is a town made of competing stories: incredible wealth and miserable survival, community and lawlessness, history and folklore, preservation and decay. So treat the quote the same way, not as a proven diary entry carved in stone, as a moral snapshot, a line that captures how Bodie was perceived: remote, rough, and spiritually dangerous, like a place where ordinary rules didn't hold. And maybe that's the real warning. Not that Bodie is haunted, but that Bodie reveals what happens when a town is built on a single hunger. Gold brings people fast. Gold pulls the desperate and the dangerous. Gold creates a city overnight. And then gold leaves. And when it leaves, it doesn't just take money, it takes meaning. Bodie's streets don't feel empty because nobody lives there now. They feel empty because so many people came for one reason, and that reason was never enough to make the town last. So, when you stand at the edge of Bodie and the wind pushes through door frames that no longer have doors, the question isn't only, is it cursed? The deeper question is, was Bodie always going to end like this? A place where time didn't stop. Time simply ran out. If you enjoy quiet, cinematic investigations into forgotten places, towns, mansions, and landscapes where history is still sitting in the dust, subscribe to The Rust and Dust. And tell us in the comments, do you think the Bodie curse is real, or is it one of the smartest preservation stories ever told? Next episode, Centralia, Pennsylvania, fire underground, town gone.